Okay, here we go. So as Jackie mentioned, I'm a gap year advisor. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, if you're familiar with a college counselor, that's basically what I am. And I try to help families and students figure out what to do in their year, interests, goals. And the most important part of a gap year is a plan. You need some sort of structured plan. So I feel very strongly that the idea of a gap year is to help these students really successfully leave high school and get into college the best way they can. And sometimes it's actually kids are in college and they need a break from college. So how can we get them to be the best they can using life skills and tools to help them succeed when they get there? I forgot to mention that I'm the mother of 4 boys, which I think that gives me a little special spot in heaven. That's what I was told. I hope. So I've been there. 2 of my students, my own kids, have already gone through the college process. So I feel for you all. I have to do it 2 more times though. So, but just take it and enjoy it if you can, because it's kind of a bear of a process, but you can make it fun as well. And one of my own kids took a gap year, and it changed him. It transformed him. And that's why I'm so excited about really sharing this with all of you tonight. If he had gone to college after 2 months after high school, he would not be the same young adult that he is today. He took a year and 2 months, and it changed him. So I will tell you a little bit more about what he did later on. So first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word gap year, just call it out. Learning.
Money. I don't think that's what she said.
What did she say?
She said money.
Money? Oh, they said learning. I was going to say, that's really good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Avoidance. Okay. Maturity. I like that. Okay. Great. This is good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how did gap years even come to be, okay? So it really began in the 1960s and 70s. In the UK, seniors would graduate from high school and they had their final exams, but they didn't start university until about 6 to 8 months later. So they had this gap. And in that gap, they started to travel and learn different cultures and music and languages. And do you all remember, if you're old enough, remember the backpacking? That was sort of like the cool thing in the 70s, right? It was backpacking, it was youth hostels, and it was becoming independent. So that's really how the term gap year really started. And you want to fast forward to the 1990s and 2000s, some people didn't want to travel alone. So there was a new industry that emerged, and it was this gap year program, really, industry. And a lot of the programs started in the UK or Australia because there's so many kids that were taking gap years in those parts of the world. And these programs were wonderful. They actually were catered to kids that had never traveled by themselves before. So it was a group of 10, 12, 14 kids and some program leaders that were teaching them leadership skills, how to travel safely, how to see the world. So a lot about travel. And parents loved them because they weren't on their own, right? So they were with another group. And some kids don't want to be independent. They want to be with this cohort. So they're fantastic programs. So let's fast forward to today. And gap years have changed, okay? Gap years do not have to include those travel programs, and they certainly can include travel. But gap years today are about their interests, the kids' goals, and life skills. What do they need to know before they get to school? So when you look at this, it's a little overpowering here, but there's so many options for gap years, okay? And when I say you don't have to travel, you can do many other things, but you also can travel. I think of gap years, there's 4 or 5 different components of gap years. And the first one I would say is work and internships. So, there's a student there he's working as a lifeguard. Another student is working in a restaurant. How many kids have had time to have a job in high school? A lot of kids haven't. So what about coming up and deciding, it's time to learn what a resume is, or figuring out how to apply for a job, or interview for a job, or what about going to a job every day, showing up on time? A lot of kids have not had that experience, and a lot of kids want to actually make money to maybe self-fund part of their gap year. So jobs were a really big part of a gap year, or they could be. And internships right now, I don't know if you have students in college yet or not, but internships is the new buzzword. You get into college and what's your internship? And that's what everyone's talking about. So I think of the gap year as a great time to have some internships. It's a great time to learn what you like and what you don't like. I had a student that was gung-ho since he was in middle school. I just want to work on Wall Street. And so he had an internship at a little boutique in Boston, actually, at an investment bank. And I said, after the 12 weeks, so how'd that go? He goes, I will never be an investment banker. And for that, who knows what he was doing for those 12 weeks as an 18-year-old. But what it did, he didn't have that internship up on that pedestal anymore, going to Wall Street. He's going to think now when he goes to college, maybe there's some other opportunities I can pursue as well. And if you want to flip that, I had a student that she was so thinking that she might want to do PT in college. So she got an internship at Spalding, with 3 days a week, and she loved it. And now she's at BU pursuing a PT degree. So I really think the idea of internships in a gap year is a great option. Now, we think about volunteer. You can volunteer in the state. You can volunteer abroad. Up there's people at a soup kitchen, and there's a student here that was in South America teaching English. So the whole idea of volunteering is huge for this age group. A lot of these students want to volunteer, and it feels good to give back. And there is adventure. So there's definitely some great, programs that are out there right now. Who's going on these programs? If you have no experience as an independent traveler, I would not suggest a student to go independently traveling alone. I think these structured programs are terrific for part of your gap year. The student down here on the lower left, his adventure independently, he wanted to bike from San Francisco to LA. That was his dream. He did it. He was so proud of himself when he finished it. Another option is farming. Has anyone ever heard of woofing? It's the most affordable way to have a gap year. So woofing can take place in Massachusetts, it can take place in Chicago, it can take place in California, or anywhere around the world. So woofing, if you don't know what it is, it's these organic farms. They hire students to work on their farms 4 to 5 hours a day, and they provide room and board. So what a great way to see different parts of our country or the world. And finally, I think language immersion is really important for gap year kids if they're interested in language. We all know about studying abroad junior year, but studying abroad junior year is actually very different than studying abroad in your gap year. A lot of the times in your gap year, you'll be living with a host family, which is really where you get the most language immersion. You're going to get the culture. When you study abroad in junior year, sometimes you're living with your college friends, right? So you're speaking a lot of English, and you don't maybe get that immersion as much. So it's very common to actually taking the language opportunity when you're in your gap year to really focus on what you want to do. Actually, the girl, I love this picture at the top. She thought she wanted to be a vet. So she went to South Africa and worked with baby baboons and monkeys. And she looks like she was having a horrible time there. But anyway, I just want to show you, these are opportunities. And there's no one gap year. There's no perfect gap year. It's really trying to plan this out. And that sometimes could be a little overwhelming. And I wanted to show you this. When I work with students, I like to make their year like a college year. So first semester, what do you want to do? What experience do you think you want to have? Maybe it's 2 experiences. These kids also want to be home for the holidays, to be with their family and be with their friends. And then second semester, what do you want to do? I find it very important to start planning their gap year when senior year. So by the time they graduate, they have a plan. A gap year doesn't start in September. And kids are playing Fortnite for a couple hours on the couch, right? And yeah, I got the gap year going, Mom, I'm going to figure it out. Now that's a vacation, okay? So I really believe that the gap years, they need a structured plan. One of my favorite students, he worked for a political campaign this fall, and then he worked at Starbucks, and he taught kids skiing. And I smile when I think of him because he said, I actually love to read, and because of high school, it's been so busy and stressful. I haven't read a book that I wanted since middle school. So he's enjoying reading. He's having fun. I mean, he said, "Gosh, Starbucks is really hard. It's really hard to work there." And he loves skiing, so he's teaching these kids skiing. So he made some pocket money, and now he's actually literally hiking the Appalachian Trail. That didn't cost a lot. And I think that's what I want you to understand, that it doesn't have to cost a lot. These kids are learning so much just being in the real world and real world learning. So I think of all these different examples up here. Why are we even talking about gap years? Why is this a conversation? Why are we here? I mean, there's a lot of people here. 3 years ago, you probably weren't going to be here, right? So anyone? Come on, talk to me. Yes?
We have a daughter who's very young, so we thought 1 year of maturity prior to community college would be very beneficial.
Yep. Okay. And I feel like this is another reason why we're here. I really do. I kind of feel like this, but this isn't about me. This is about our students. Students are on this path and this wheel for, at this point, 13 years when they're a senior. So they're going, right? And they keep racing. They're racing to get through middle school, and they're racing to get through high school. And what's the end of the race, really? What is the end of the race? It's college? Have they even thought about it? And I always say it takes a lot of courage for these kids to take a step off the typical path, right? But I always say to parents, it takes a lot of courage for parents to say, my kid's taking a gap year. And I think that we have to understand that as parents, that it's, my son actually says to me all the time, Mom, it's a gift that keeps on giving. He owns his gap year. He loved his gap year. It's part of who he is. I don't think I mentioned what he did. He actually worked full time. He worked 40 to 50 hours a week at a local restaurant. He wanted to take a gap year program. I have 4 kids. I said, I'm not doing one of those expensive programs. I can't afford it, right? That's what we're all going to say. He put $10,000 towards a gap year program and went to Cuba for 3 months. It changed his life. But what changed his life was when he was working in the restaurant. The first 3 weeks, he came home and said, Mom, I didn't realize that going to college was a privilege. There you go. I feel like that just there showed him that, why are you going to college? And a lot of kids aren't thinking about why they're going, they're just going. So as much as we talk about this, and my job tonight is to sort of interrupt your thought process that the gap year really is a real option. You don't have to take a gap year, but I want you to think about the option that it's real. There was a study and some data done. These are all 4-year colleges across the country. Okay, this is the average. Up to 33% of students will not return after freshman year. Only 59% of the students will ever graduate. And what do you think the year is? How long do you think it takes for kids to graduate now? Average. How did you guys know that? That's a horrible number, right? So you look at this and you're thinking, wow, okay, that's like, that we're washing these freshmen out. They're not making it. We've all read so many articles about anxiety on college campuses. I don't know if, right around the holidays, the Thanksgiving Day time, there's an article in the New York Times. Did anyone read it? And it said their logo was, kids are coming home from college and they're not going back. And it was a really, a very article basically saying 30% of the kids, basically these numbers. A couple days later, there was an On Point segment on NPR, and I listened to it, and I was just, it was wonderful to hear this neuropsychologist, and I actually wrote it down by hand, so my little note card here. Many kids who burn themselves out in high school need a year to recover from the stress and heal their brain. Does that make sense? It's really, it's been a challenge. I could talk along about that, but I don't want to, because I want to show you this. So the kids that take gap years, they will enroll in college between 6 and 12 months of ending their gap year. And when they get to college, they have higher GPAs. This is the data that we have. So what it tells us is kids that take gap years, they actually go to college, they stay, and they graduate on time. So this slide is a lot nicer than the one I just showed you. So why, at this point, a lot of colleges, have thought about gap years. Harvard, for instance, for 40 years has said, sure, take a gap year. They didn't call it a gap year 40 years ago, but in their acceptance rate, they say, take a year off. We want you when you can be the best you can on my campus, right? They want the best, strongest, ready to learn type of student. Middlebury actually on their website say, do you want to take a gap semester? You can apply that way. They're called February starts. So they can have a gap semester if they want. They can choose that. Eventually, the colleges are really starting to get on board now. And I've been really interested in the colleges' attitudes towards gap years. So I did some research last year. And these are just some of the quotes that I received back from colleges. NC State, we see them as beneficial to a student's intellectual growth and maturity. Boston College, we fully support the decision to take a gap year. And I didn't even get this up on a slide, but recently, Duke University actually just put this out in the New York Times saying, we believe that many students could benefit from a gap year that offers time for exploration, service, and growth. At Duke, we value the experience and perspective that students who have taken a gap year bring to campus. So right now, all of the 2019 fall admits that decide to take a gap year at Duke, 24 of them, they're going to give between $5,000 and $15,000 to help fund their gap year. That's how strongly Duke feels about gap years. And once the big guys come on board, it's happening. So I would say 95% of independent schools and a lot of state schools will accept a deferral for gap year. So I'm not going to go into the deferral process tonight, but they're very accepting of gap years. And what are the benefits do they see? And what are the benefits are there of a gap year? I mean, there's 1,000 benefits, really. But I think the woman in the back, you said maturity. I think that maturity is probably the number one benefit. Their brain has that one more year. I mean, teenage brains are a mess, really. And they have one more year to start the mature process. And for me, I think self-discovery. I don't think these kids know who they are. I think they're on this hamster wheel, and they're told what to do. They're told how many extracurriculars they have to have, tests they have to take. It's a time for them to be authentic and be themselves. You know, they're kind of in a bubble, right? In their hometown. College basically is another bubble. You know, all the kids have the same scores, and they're all kind of the same kind of kid. Their gap year, they're them. They're authentic. They can be, nobody knows them. So it's really a time for maturity and figuring out who they are. And I think finally another attribute would probably be engagement. Engagement in college when they get there. I always tell parents and students, you have one chance to be a freshman. So when you go, make sure it's like the best you can be. We spend a lot of time as parents, I did it, like going around to colleges, making sure it's the right size, the right fit, like the part of the country, is there a beach there, is there, you know, whatever. And we don't necessarily think it's at the right time. I do believe if it's the right school and it's the right time, that really makes the right success for the student. We're setting them up for success. The number one reason, the Princeton Review, I was at the Webster Arena recently speaking, and this guy from the Princeton Review said, I have a really good slide for you. I didn't put it up tonight, I have it in my mind. The number one reason why kids drop out of college, I didn't know this answer, and it was lack of non-academic skills. They get the grades, they know how to do the work, but what are these life skills that they don't know? And with that, Michael is going to take over.